Living in glory days on Turntables and Tea. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Cory.
And this week, if you couldn't tell by the intro, we will be doing Bruce Springsteen's 1984 album, Born in the U.S.A. It's our second album that we're doing that turns 40 this year. And I picked this album. It wasn't quite the most obvious pick for me, but I do have some opinions on Springsteen, and this is an interesting album to discuss, and there's a lot going on here, so I thought this was a good time to do it. And I was hearing quite a bit about him because he actually just performed a concert in Baltimore recently at our Camden Yards, so he was on the brain a bit, and we didn't attend it, but it's always news when somebody's playing a stadium in Baltimore because we don't get too many of them. Just so for those who don't know, we don't get too many of them. So the boss was on the mind, and this is one of the biggest albums released that year by a mile. So this just felt like the perfect time to do this album.
Yeah, by a mile. It is. It's one of the biggest ones of that year. And it's one that lives iconically, whether people like it or not. It's the one that pushed him to superstardom, if you must. I'll go out and say that. This is he was definitely a household name, but this is the one that put him up there as an American icon, in my opinion.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, this album's a huge part of why he can still play stadiums today. Because he was popular before this. But this put him on the superstar echelon of like a Michael Jackson almost. He was very close to that level. Like this was his Thriller, and there's a few similarities between the two albums, actually. Two blockbuster albums of the 80s, but of course, when this all started, Springsteen didn't set out to make Thriller. So this album dates back to 1982. The prior album he just finished touring was The River, which was a double album, but it gave him his biggest pop hit to date in 1980 with Hungry Heart, one of his best songs, in my opinion. And it had him initially kind of wanting to move more in that direction. So he was writing a lot of songs, and he just had a lot of thoughts about a lot of things because he was Bruce Springsteen. He just was writing these about people's trials and tribulations, even though he was a rich rock star by this point in time. He was quite comfortable. And some of the songs that he was writing were definitely ready to go with his E Street Band, but some of them were not. They were just so somber that he just felt like this isn't going to work with the band. And before he really, instead of recording a follow-up immediately with the E Street Band, in 1982, Bruce Springsteen released the Nebraska album, which is a lo-fi collection of songs. He used the demo versions of the tunes, and it was not a commercial album. It was decidedly not meant to be. It got great critical acclaim. There's folks who will say it's his best album. Very well regarded in his discography. But then Springsteen kind of had to go back to doing the actual proper follow-up to The River with his band. And some of those songs from those early sessions of what turned into Nebraska ended up being used, but he also had to keep on writing, and the sessions did end up going into 1984. He didn't finish this album until like 2 or 3 months before it was actually released. So,
wow.
Yeah, this album took a long time, and there were well over 50 songs recorded for it.
Yeah, and not to get too far ahead, but you can feel a little bit of that. You can feel a little bit of we're picking songs out of a giant bowl, so to speak, here. Where we're going to have to whittle down to get the album that we got to. Whether that's good or bad, you can definitely tell that there is other music being written. Just listening to this album, it just feels like that.
Yeah, and this definitely, unlike Nebraska or some of his albums that followed this one, this is definitely not a concept album. Um,
No.
yeah, that just was not at all what he was going for. And to stay with the times a bit more, so the E Street Band also introduced synthesizers, which was controversial amongst some of them, but it was part of playing the game in 1984. If you wanted to stay
Oof.
with the times and make hits.
I only bite my tongue here because I'm in that number. Spoilers. I don't know if I'm happy or sad about that. We'll find out. We'll find out. Synthesizers are a jarring sound here for me. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but definitely a new addition to this E Street sound. And some of it became iconic.
Yes, some of it did. Most definitely. And I actually read a book about this album that was published this year by one of my favorite music writers, Stephen Hayden. He published a book called There Was Nothing You Could Do, subtitled Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA and the End of the Heartland. And if you have any interest in Springsteen or this album, I would highly recommend it. I found it an invaluable tool when it comes to learning about these songs and the context behind them. And he even contextualized this album in terms of some of the contemporaneous albums that followed this one to kind of show why Born in the USA took off the way that it did. That I found very informative and eye-opening when it came to researching this album, because I'm not a Springsteen expert at all. In all honesty, I find him to be overrated, though I do like songs on this album. That's why I picked it, of course, but that is part of why I think he is so rife for discussion, I would say.
I thought I remembered you saying that, which intrigued me more when we said we were going to do this album. Because in the vein of the tea, the yin to the yang of our turntables, there's plenty to talk about musically and pop culture-ish in this album. But I thought you did say that. I thought you were not the biggest Springsteen fan.
I am not. I'm sure we've done a lot of episodes of this show, so I don't remember every comment I've ever made, but I'm sure I did at some point. He is not my go-to for this heartland rock genre. I'm much more of a Tom Petty person, but that's just me. And this is a pop culture icon moment. Like the album cover is such an iconic image of the era. And Springsteen became a rock star who sold out stadiums because of this album. The Haydn book for me really did contextualize this because he really kind of bridged some gaps, I would say. Like he was somebody who kids and parents could like. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't as out there as like a Prince or a Madonna, who also were huge on the charts at the same time. Like they just had a bit more danger to them. He wasn't as splashy as Michael Jackson or Cyndi Lauper. He had enough sex appeal that he wasn't threatening to anybody. And the songs spoke to people. They felt that he was singing about them regardless of their where they fell on the political spectrum, which is an important subtext of the album, very much is the politics of it all and of the 1980s.
It really is. And, learning more about this album and knowing this album, but learning about this album, finding out that a lot of the songs and messages even that I grew up thinking were pure American, pro-American, end up being a little bit more vague in their actual meaning, or more so a little bit more opposite in a lot of the cases, which is very unique for this album, in my opinion, because I think there's an argument, or I would say that there's an argument that a lot of the popularity behind this album, or a lot of the push, almost this is tough to say. I'm dancing around it. I'm just gonna put it right out there. In my opinion, a lot of people misunderstood this album, but that was a bonus for the popularity of this album, because where people thought it was pro America, it was more so the plight of the everyman, and that's not necessarily positive. That I say, I try to say it without doing spoilers for us going through, but there's definitely in my opinion, a mass misconception of a lot of these, especially one of the biggest hits on here, and it really pushed this album, in my opinion, where I think if people really broke it down, I think this album would have lost a little bit of gusto, because it actually goes in the other way, in my opinion.
I completely agree. And a lot of that really does have to do with the music of the album, because this is a very up-tempo album. It's his most pop influenced easily. And it's such a contrast to Nebraska, which really lyrically shares a lot of the same themes of it. But Nebraska, there's no mistaking the somber nature of the songs because of its production and because it's lo-fi. Whereas here, these songs are pure rock and roll. So it does miss a lot of the subtext, and it can be debated whether or not that was intentional. I know I'm sure we both have some thoughts on that one. But yeah, this album absolutely dominated. It was released June 4th, 1984, and it was pretty quickly successful. It spent a lot of time at number 2, right behind Prince's Purple Rain, which topped the charts for almost half of 1984. I wonder why.
Well, I mean, looking and seeing that it was the top selling album in 1985, I thought the same thing, like, oh, that's because Purple Rain was here topping the charts for that long, you know?
Yeah, it was. Purple Rain topped the charts for 24 weeks. And I mean, obviously, we both think it was deserved. Go listen to our Purple Rain episode if you haven't, to hear us talk about that wonderful album. But yes, this ended up being number 1 in 1985, and it was a stacked year for it. And this album, I mentioned the Thriller comparison because there were some musical influences of Thriller when it came to recording this album. But in a business sense, it really did, because Thriller showed how you could make a blockbuster pop album and extend an album cycle, because Thriller was the top-selling album of both 1983 and 1984, and it had 7 singles off of it. So before that, the most you usually would have had was 4, and this album followed suit. The Boss had a 17-month album cycle with 7 singles, and funnily enough, matched the record of Thriller with 7 top 10 hits. But one thing that shocks many people, none of these 7 top 10 hits ended up making it to number 1.
Really?
Yes, really. And it seems baffling, but it also isn't when you consider just what a stacked era it was for pop music. So many heavy hitters were putting out hits at the same time. Like, if you look at the charts, a lot of the songs that reached the top in both 1984 and 1985 are still very well remembered today, like these songs are.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, even with us looking through albums to do, it's wild to see how much timeless, iconic music came out in 84. So that makes sense thinking about it like that. I think the reason it takes me aback is because the saturation, in my opinion, radio wise, is so huge. Or I feel like it was so huge. And now, mind you, I was 3 when this came out, but I'm talking about growing up. This album never really went away, radio wise. So that blows me away as far as none of them ever reaching number 1.
Yeah, I mean, these are the first songs I ever heard from Springsteen were songs on this album. And Springsteen himself had an uncomfortable relationship with this album in its aftermath, and he very deliberately stripped back with Tunnel of Love, which was the follow-up in 1987. And the album itself has a it's had some mixed reception, but mostly positive. As time has gone on, it's only been more acclaimed. Like, no, this is a landmark album. It deserved its success, even if it might not be Springsteen's magnum opus.
Heard.
Which, but he's one of those people where a lot of people have, where listeners have different opinions on what actually is his magnum opus. He's one of those artists. Like, some will say Nebraska, some will say Darkness on the Edge of Town, some will say Born to Run. It's all over the place. And, well, some would say this one. It's certainly his commercial peak. It's gone 17 times platinum in the United States. Yeah.
The good old boy from Jersey/New York.
Yep. 30 million copies sold worldwide of one album. That's what he did. That's why they call him the boss, because he was ruling it and he got into the stratosphere with this album. And, well, we're going to find out the songs that push this album into the stratosphere with our track by track, which I'm ready to do.
Let's get at it.
So the album begins with the title track, Born in the U.S.A. We start off with a bang. This is definitely a pure rock and roll song. It has a synth intro to kick it off, but it's pure stadium rock kind of sing-along. And this song is notoriously misunderstood. Springsteen wrote this about the soldiers in Vietnam and how they were treated upon returning home. And the lyrics don't imply it. Like, there's explicit references to Vietnam in the reference. But the sound of the song obviously caused many to misinterpret it. And the politics of it. Well, actually, I'm going to let you go. Tell me what you think of the song before I go into that, because it's a lot.
Well, I'll just say I'm right with you. This is one of the ones that I was leaning towards on totally misunderstood. I mean, you open the album with this almost hidden agenda here. He's coming straight off being inspired by reading Born on the 4th of July and taking all these thoughts and these thoughts into the process of making this track right here, and really opening an album with some dark narration hidden behind this really synth heavy poppy sing-along jam. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about that, but I'm with you. This was misunderstood. I'll start it off with a hot tea take. This is not my song, man. I have such a hard time with this song. I always have. Yes, it's an earwig. When you dive into it, it becomes more interesting because of the juxtaposition of the lyrics to the music. But as far as taking it as a straight track or a straight composition musically, it feels like a 7-minute song, and it's only 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. It really, really goes on for me about a minute and a half too long period. I understand the arena rock behind him and the thought process, but I'll go out on a limb and say that wasn't even in the full swing just yet in the career. Maybe it was, but still, it's tough, man. It sounds like an opener and it hits correct like an opener, but once you get past the shock and awe of it really falls flat as a composition to me. And I know I might take a lot of heat for that one, but it's a subpar opener at best musically.
That's a hot tea take. I think this is a great song musically. I first heard this song when I was a kid. I watched like a VH1 greatest songs of the 80s. This was the only Springsteen song on there, and it wouldn't have been my number one pick for a Springsteen song to represent. That one will come much later in the album. but it's an earworm. I really enjoyed it. And I do feel that all the politics of it all have really changed everyone's view of the song. It's kind of impossible not to. It's even changed the boss's view of the song, as I learned. But how this all began, in October of 1984, conservative columnist George Will saw Springsteen perform live and heard this song, and he said that he saw this as a patriotic song. He said, like, I don't know Bruce Springsteen's politics, but he absolutely like, this song speaks to the common man, was basically what he was saying. And George Will, in an election year, was connected to the re-election campaign of President Ronald Reagan, and
Yeah.
Will thought Springsteen might even endorse Reagan. He didn't know that Springsteen was not going to be voting for Reagan, but Reagan praised Bruce Springsteen in a speech, and there were people who found it hard to believe he actually knew much about Bruce Springsteen. It's like, well, how are you saying that? What do you know? But Springsteen did not respond positively to it at all. But what I learned from the book that I read by Stephen Hyde, and this is fascinating to me, much unlike today, in 1984, Bruce Springsteen was not actually a partisan figure. He was a lot more ambiguous about his views. When he was asked in an interview about Walter Mondale, he even said, well, I don't know if Walter Mondale would be a lot better than Ronald Reagan, which is not something that he would have said today or even many years later. He left this much more open to interpretation, and the book I read argued that it was kind of intentional. Of course, the song was misinterpreted. Springsteen encouraged it to an extent, which I totally agree with. And it wasn't until the mid-90s when Springsteen went on record to say the Republicans misinterpreted this song. And now there's no questioning where Springsteen stands on the political spectrum. He's been campaigning for Democrats for years. He even did a podcast with Barack Obama. Like, there's no questioning where he stands. But he was a lot more ambiguous in 1984, and that was part of his appeal, frankly. So I do find it interesting how that's changed over the years, and that was something new that I learned.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I looked into, and I'd never questioned it before, but I looked into the fact of, had he ever been a soldier? And one of the reasons I found out that a lot of this was coming off of him reading Born on the 4th of July, but found out that he had actually been drafted and failed his physical. And I wonder if the ambiguity of his stance, or even some of what he feels the urge to write about, came from that open wound of getting denied inside of the drafting process. It's a very unique stance for someone who was almost there to write constantly about it. Even though he's a champion of the everyman, it's still, for me, I feel like that leads to some of the ambiguity there, as far as him just taking a back seat and not being in the forefront talking like that back then.
Yeah, definitely not now. And many would argue he's lost that everyman appeal over the year because he is so partisan in his politics. And it was like that even before these past couple of elections. He campaigned for John Kerry in 2004 with a tour. Like, he's been, this is not a new thing. It may, I mean, U.S. politics have gotten very fucking weird over the past decade, but I don't need to tell you that. And we're trying to escape. I'm trying to escape and not think about that at the moment because it's frankly fucking horrifying. But But yes, but a big part of why Born in the USA is so well known is because it was the third single from the album. It actually only peaked at number 9, which is kind of shocking considering this song's longevity. And it really, I looked at its chart performance, it kind of free fell from the top 10 pretty quickly. It did not have the longevity of some of the other songs on this album on the Hot 100, even though over the years it has, which it makes sense why this wasn't the biggest hit on the album. It is a polarizing song. It was even then, but it's one that everybody knows and has an opinion on.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. It's wild to hear that it dropped so quickly because it's such a staple these days, or it has been for so long. I feel like maybe that's just a misconception because of the radio saturation.
Yeah, this song's never gone off the radio. That's
Yeah.
yeah, definitely a case. It's definitely been on the radio more than the next track, which I would, even though it was a single, I would say is a bit underrated. Cover Me. This song was actually originally written for Donna Summer, uh, in 1982. But John Landau, the producer of the album, convinced the boss to keep it for himself. And Springsteen did write another song for Donna Summer called Protection, and that went on her 1982 self-titled album. Interestingly, that song wasn't even a single, which is pretty mind-blowing that there was a Bruce Springsteen song on this album and it wasn't even a single. That's something right there. But this is the closest that you'll get to like a dance song on the album, probably. At least on the first side of the album. It definitely is. And you know what? This song is just a really good rock song. It doesn't have a great big message to it, but you know what? It doesn't need to. It stands on its own, and I think it's fantastic. This is an underrated single, in my opinion.
I'm 100% with you. This is super underrated, in my opinion. This is a much more full composition musically. I mean, Van Zant is going to town here. There's so much feeling in this song. There's, even though it very subtly touches some of the same musical thoughts that were in the scene of Born in the USA, it really delivers as a number 2, in my opinion. Most definitely, it gives it strengthens this album coming off Born in the USA, where this album could have faltered coming out of like an arena rock anthem, so to speak, in Born in the USA. This gives a real validity here. And then on top of that, such a wild and more powerful, in my opinion, narrative here, where it's love as a defense, really finding strength inside your partner in a very, very vulnerable state of this soldier in the narrative. So it's a cool tune on all levels. I really like it as a number 2. We talk about doing its job. This one does its job here, and definitely underrated. One of the ones in this listen that garnered a spot on my Spotify playlist, because it was one that I had never really found myself going to, but as I kept listening, this album is one that really stuck out to me. So I did Cover Me.
So do I. And it's just not one of the songs you hear as much today from this album. And it totally deserves to be. But it was another top 10 hit. This was the second single. It made it up to number 7 on the Hot 100. And as I mentioned, close to a dance song. It even made it to number 11 on the dance charts. And there was a 12-inch club remix of it because you can dance to it. That's where I can hear why this would have been written for the Queen of Disco. It makes perfect sense, but it doesn't feel inauthentic to Springsteen at all. which I really appreciate. So definitely one of my favorite Springsteen songs, period. And a song like this is one of the reasons I'm glad we are discussing this album. Because when he's in his pocket, he's really good.
Agreed.
Not
Agreed.
going to take
Like,
that from him ever.
yeah, no, not at all. I at first I had a tough time with his delivery of his lyrics here. I thought it was a tad bit muddled, almost in a dare I say Elvis kind of delivery. But as it grew, I got away from that. But I thought that was pertinent to share here because it was definitely one of the things first listen that I was like, ugh, a little muddled on the delivery there, but still such a solid tune.
Yeah, and it's not the last time we'll be thinking about Elvis on this album either.
Heard that.
But not on the next song, which is Darlington County. This is not one of the singles. This one, it's about two guys going on a road trip to Darlington County, which is in South Carolina, and they end up spending time with women when they get to the end of it. It's just kind of a buddy road trip kind of song. I think this is a solid tune. I wouldn't say it's one of the highlights of the album, but I think it's just showcasing the Americana of Springsteen's songwriting. I feel like it does that well. And it doesn't feel out of place with this collection of songs. Lyrically, I think it stands out from everything. But musically, it doesn't feel out of place with everything else that we've heard so far and that we're going to continue to hear. Cool song. I can see why it wasn't a single now.
Yeah, I'm gonna pin that why it wasn't a single. It is a cool song. It has a cool vibe. It is definitely sitting inside of this everyman thought process that the boss does so well. It's a buddy road trip story that ends up with, if you're two single guys out on a road trip, it ends up on what you're looking to do, have some fun, meet some ladies, and it's lighthearted. It's lighthearted in its composition, it's lighthearted in its message, and in a subconscious listener type of deal, it just takes you along. It doesn't take away from the album. And really the only way it adds to the album for me is that it definitely is paced correctly. I feel like it's in a really good spot here because it's a much more open tune and a lot less on the synthesizer than we've heard so far. So it opens the album up and is a lot cleaner than what we've heard coming into this. I read a bunch of times that this was Creedence Clearwater like. I don't necessarily get that vibe here, but it definitely is light and it feels nice here. We get Clarence rocking out throughout this, so I can only add to the love there. But it is it's a cool number 3. It's a cool number 3. Now, why it wasn't a single? Maybe another hot tea take. This is, I almost said a poor man's Glory Days, and that's not really what I meant. But this is very, very close to Glory Days, and I really think that's one of the reasons why you didn't see this go up. Musically, I find them very, very similar, and no spoilers here. It more so adds a bookend type of feel as far as from here to Glory Days, but it's way too close to Glory Days for me for it to be anywhere near a single.
I can get where I totally get where you're coming from with that. And it's interesting you mentioned the Creedence comparison, which I read a few times as well, but 1984 was actually the year of John Fogerty's big solo comeback with Centerfield and Rock and Roll Girls. That was the year he put himself back out there and made hits again. after a hiatus from doing so.
Saying center field, I could see the comparison there. Um, but yeah, I feel like that's a reach. Maybe I'm in the minority there.
I don't know if it sounds like center field, but the my point was we actually were getting John Fogerty at the time. The as in
Heard,
the people were getting real John Fogerty music. So there would
heard.
if they wanted a Fogerty like song and wanted to put that out as a single, there was really no need to if you could get the real deal.
That's true.
Yeah, that's more my point, if that makes sense.
Heard.
But
It does.
yeah, actually, I think if the next song reminds me a bit more of Credence than Darlington County, which is Working on the Highway. This was originally recorded for Nebraska with the title Child Bride. It's the same story being told here, just with a more upbeat arrangement. And I, for one, am glad that they went with the more upbeat arrangement here. Because I mean, the title alone tells you we're talking about some sad shit, frankly. With the story being told. And the juxtaposition is really interesting on a song like this. And this one definitely has a rockabilly feel to it. It's not one of the more synthy songs on the album, even though that's definitely present in its composition. But yeah, I like the sound of this song. I actually think this is, spoiler alert, the most effective rockabilly like song on the album. I'm gonna say that now.
We might be on the other side on this one. I as cool as the rockabilly parts are, that synthesizer that keeps going throughout sort of takes me out of it on this composition. That being said, I like this song. As far as a full song, it really does some cool things. I will go out on the record here and say that I was really surprised at how much juxtaposition he uses in these songs, like songs that I've taken for granted my whole life as just happy tunes. When I finally sit down, when I got a chance to sit down with this record over the past week, it's like, wow, man, there's a lot more going on here than I realized. So I respect that. And this one is one of the ones where it's right there. I mean, we're at hard labor by the end of this song. Like, this is a pretty wild tune, and it's really almost hidden behind this wild rockabilly, synth heavy rockabilly. So a good song. Like I said, the synths for me on this album, they tend to take me out of this American rock and roll sound, but not too much for me to say a negative word about Working on the Highway. I think it works out well. No pun intended.
Yeah, it does. And it's just a perfect Springsteen song title, frankly.
Heard.
And it delivers. Heard. But we're going to continue that kind of imagery a bit with the next track, which is Downbound Train, which is about it's about a lost spouse. So another sad song that's kind of upbeat a bit. But this one, it's a nice tune. It's might be my yeah, hot tea take. This is my least favorite on side one. That's what I'll say.
Be with you, but it's more so this one is one of the ones that I was alluding to, where I was saying it feels like there was more written for this album, and they were picking out here and there. The more I listen to Downbound Train, the more I could see it in a Nebraska setting, stripped down and working way better. This one seems like it got reworked a little bit too much for me. It's not a terrible song, but it's definitely the first time on this album where I did lose a little bit. I do lose a little bit of interest going through this song. So unfortunately, it's not the hit. It definitely is not the hit of side one. And as neat as the premise is, and as much as I dig a sad song here and there, this one just doesn't do the whole thing for me.
I, I agree with you. You put the words I was looking for. This is a Nebraska song. It was recorded at the same time as a lot of the Nebraska songs. This should have been one of them. This is just not on the right album at all. Um,
Yeah.
I think there were definitely other songs that were recorded that would have been more appropriate fits, and yeah, would have stood out a bit more on Nebraska. Um, I think with its story, I'll say that. And yeah, not that an acoustic song doesn't have a place here. It's just with this narrative, I don't think it fits with what we're going for. But yeah, I feel like, again, I think the thriller idea was really in their heads in this album, and they were just trying to make an album packed with it. So I think that was their main objective instead of telling a cohesive story. And commercially, they very much succeeded. I am not going to take that from them. As for how the album flows in terms of a story, that's a bit of a different thing. I do feel this track list is a bit scattershot and we go a bit all over the place because we once again really shift gears with the next track, which is I'm on Fire. Straight rockabilly. This is very much, it was said to be influenced by Johnny Cash. I hear that. I also hear a lot of Elvis in this song. This is Springsteen doing Elvis with his vocals. And it's even a short song, too. It's only a little more than 2.5 minutes, which is perfect idea for that throwback because that's the length of a lot of Elvis songs. Yeah, this one,
Yeah.
oh boy. So this is one of the hits on the album, and it's actually, I think I've read that it might be, if not Springsteen's most covered song, period, the most covered off of this album. So people really like this song. And it had a video and got some MTV play. I think this song is so overrated. I think it's got a decent hook to it, but overall, I think it's pretty cookie cutter, actually. That's definitely my hot tea take of the album. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but this is just no, this song's just not quite it for me.
We got tea spilling all over the place here. Uh, we're on a little bit of a different side here as far as this song goes. I've always dug this song, but going through this listen critically, this is the real first time on this album that I'm a proponent for the synthesizers. I think they work amazing in this song. I love the Johnny Cash ish throwback. I don't get as much Elvis as here as I get. I even get some Roy Orbison here as well. But I love that. I'm a sucker for that sound. I dig it here. More so, I'm critically intrigued by the placement of this at the end of side one. We talk a lot about, songs doing their job and songs ending a side that we immediately want to flip over. In this instance, he leaves us with a song that really lets us take a breath, contemplate what we've heard on this first side, and not so much run to flip it over, but more of, all right, let me see what else this album has. It's a very, very somber song to end the first half of this album, but for me, it really works out here. Yeah, I dig this one. I think it was in a sea of hits. I think this was a really cool choice to end this first side.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm definitely in the minority. I don't think it's a bad song. I just don't think it's the most worthy song. Just period. There's just a lot of songs I'd rather listen to than this one. But I am in the minority, like I said. This was the fourth single from the album, and it made it up all the way to number 6 on the charts in early 1985. So, I know the book by Stephen Hayden even mentioned that the success of Don Henley's The Boys of Summer probably helps this song become successful because that had such a retro style storytelling sound to it. And well, a lot of Heartland rock in it as well. Mike Campbell of the Heartbreakers co-wrote that song. And that's a classic song, period. Just, but we're not talking about Don Henley or Mike Campbell. We're talking about Bruce Springsteen. And it's time to flip it over with side two, starting with No Surrender. This song actually made it on the album because Stephen Van Zandt insisted it be on the album. And he was one of the no synthesizer proponents in the band, and he actually left before the tour for this album. He made some appearances, but he rejoined later on. He's currently in the band, but at the time, he was out of there. And I mean, it's likely inspired by Stephen Van Zandt. Um, and I mean, it's a nice song. It's a cool way to start side two. I definitely agree with that decision. I think it kicks us off into a good way. I can hear what Van Zandt heard in this song.
Yeah, I'm always with Silvio. There's a special, if Silvio says he's down, I'm down. But as far as an opener, it's a little bit bland for me here. It has a cool, it's a grower. It's a grower for me. It has a cool sound once you get there, and I can totally see if this is inspired by their friendship throughout the years, and near and dear to their hearts. I can see why it makes the album. Not a terrible song, not even a bad song. It's a good song. It's just, it doesn't have the spark for the side two opener that I was hoping for critically here. I could see this maybe, well, you'd have to switch around a bunch, but as far as the opener, it doesn't set the tone that I thought I was going to get here. And for me, it just takes me a little bit out of it, as far as the opener goes, but it's a cool one. And, like I said, if Silvio says go for it, who am I to say anything?
Yeah, John Kerry also said go for it. This song was a big part of his presidential campaign, but I think the song worked better for Silvio than it did John Kerry because didn't help him get elected. Oh well. But this song's a big time live favorite actually of Springsteen. Even though it wasn't a single, I was pretty surprised to learn that the non-singles of this album, especially recently, have gotten a lot more plays at shows than the singles from this album for the most part.
You can start to see that musically around the beginning of the last third of No Surrender. You really start to get a live feel, or I do. Van Zandt starts to really sing out there, and the band does a few crescendos there that really sing live to me.
Yeah, I can definitely hear that. I mean, there's a reason Van Zandt wanted it on the album. And this one actually was done at Camden Yards, this past weekend.
Nice.
This was on there, as was the next song, Bobby Jean, which is another song done a lot live, by the E Street Band. And, again, not a single, one of the last songs recorded for the album, actually. And a lot of people think this song specifically is about Springsteen's friendship with Stephen Van Zandt. But, I mean, I feel like it could be about anybody in your life, which is a part of Springsteen's appeal. He writes songs that appeal at any time or to any person or situation. I think anybody has a Bobby Jean in their life that they could be singing this song to. It's even gender ambiguous, this song. And I have to say, Clarence Clemens is on fire on this song. I think he really pushes this one to the top. He's always on fire, but I think this song is really one that benefits from his presence on it. And yeah, hot tea take. This should have been a single. Maybe not a hot tea take, but I would have definitely preferred this as a single over couple of songs that were chosen as singles.
Yeah, I'm with you. This song kills. It really speaks. I love the ambiguousness of this as far as gender, as far as just really, it doesn't nail down one specific friendship. It really opens itself up to interpretation. I think that's important. Right out of my notes with the Clarence stuff, he does here, which he does here something that we don't see as often as I would like from him in the E Street Band setting, and that is really running with the actual melody of the song. He becomes almost an electric guitar part for the latter third of this song, and it's amazing. It is amazing. You know, we get a lot, always, like you said, he's on fire, and we get this high energy playing that almost ends up sounding improvisational at its peaks, but this one is very, very written, very, very scripted, very, very on the head melodically, and I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite pieces, especially on this album from him. So this one is up there for me. I dig it. I like it in a little 2-punch package here with No Surrender 2, and it uplifts it almost, where I can understand where No Surrender opened this side now as a listener after Bobby Jean.
Yeah, but I think this one's a step up from No Surrender too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It definitely elevates this side of the album.
Most definitely. And interestingly, so the last 4 songs on this album are all singles. Spoiler alert. I think it's so weird how the singles are spaced out on this album. Maybe it's just me. I'm used to a lot of the singles being like at the beginning of the album in my era of listening. When I think of blockbuster albums, a lot of the hits are at the beginning or even in the middle, but not here. They make you wait for some of them. And the first of them is I'm Going Down. Sadly, no relation to Mary J. Blige's I'm Going Down, which is a cover, but she chose to cover a better song. Spoiler alert. This was the 6th single from the album. Pretty late in the game for a single choice. And it was even said this song's about being sexually frustrated, which okay. I mean, write a song about it if you want. That's all on you. This should not have been a single. Bobby Jean should have been a single instead of this. I think this is like a pretty pedestrian rocker for Bruce and the boys. I'm just really not feeling this one. And it made it up to number 9 on the Hot 100, but it's definitely, I think, the least popular hit off of this album. I'd have to double check the streaming numbers, but he doesn't even perform this song very often live. And I can see why. There's just other stuff to choose from. And this is the most forgettable of the singles on this album.
Yeah, it's really, I don't want to beat it up too much more, but it's really one note for me here. And that's tough. If I'm reaching for a silver lining here, I say it makes sense as a number 3 inside of this 6 song second side, only because it gives us a second as a listener to, wow, I almost said get a drink, and I didn't mean not listen to the album, but it gives us a little break. But yeah, it's really one note. We get some cool Clarence here. We get a little clap along vibe, but it's nothing special. I got more of like a breakup style song here in my interpretation, but I can see the sexual frustration. Regardless, it's redundant inside of itself, and it irks me in that in the composition there. But yeah, I'm not even going to say not a terrible song. This is my gun to the head. This is definitely my gun to the head as far as the album. It is not my favorite at all. It just sort of is there, unfortunately.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, just this one isn't it. And it's weird that this peaked at the same spot as Born in the USA. I just find that odd too. One of them is like a Bruce signature song, and this one's well, to some people like it, obviously, but this one's not it for me. But
Yeah, it's a later single too, so it's already got so much hype. I feel like they're all popping out, up top there, on their debut because he was everywhere at that point. I would think that's just me on a quick thought there, but who knows?
yeah, makes sense to me. But the next song is undeniably a bona fide hit. Glory Days. This is, yeah, it's got the nostalgic title in it. They're sitting talking about Glory Days, but this song has an edge to it because Springsteen's kind of looking down on the person reminiscing on the Glory Days because he's got it going on now. And that's a very real sentiment. I know that's one that I can certainly relate to. It's like everybody remembers the glory days or their youth differently than others. And I think this song really taps into that. Speaks to a big reality. So I have a funny story about this song, actually. So I do remember Bruce Springsteen performed the halftime show in 2009. I had to be reminded of the year and look that up. And I only knew like the two biggest, most well-known songs off of this album. And I remember saying to my dad, he didn't do any of the hits, as if I knew what I was talking about. And my dad said, no, actually, this was a big hit. And now I know, yes, Glory Days was a big hit. But I did look at his set lists again, and it is hilarious that I thought Born to Run was not a hit. That is. But the other two songs were not radio hits, so I wasn't completely off base there. But yeah, I did actually my main Springsteen introduction. I did buy a Springsteen Greatest Hits CD when I was in middle school, and this was one of the songs. There were 4 of the singles from this album on it because they wanted to show everything, and this one was on there, and I mean, undeservedly so. This one deserves all of the praise. This is a beloved hit for a reason. I'm glad I still hear it on the radio to this day. Love this song.
Yeah, I'm with you. This one gets down, it rocks. And this is another one where I'm pro synthesizer here. They do their job. They don't take me out of the song. They add to the whole of this composition, and I enjoy that. Going and reading about this and somebody talking to 2 classmates and going over it over and over again as far as the narrative goes, it tends to remind me of the narrative that we get in Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. And I don't know if it does quite, actually I do. It doesn't do quite the job that Italian Restaurant does, giving that clear narrative, but it's cool. I dig it. I dig it. This is another one of those wild. I don't know if I feel terrible saying I don't know, but it's wild for me that these songs are so hidden behind this upbeat music. Like this, most people will write this off as like, oh, Glory Days, this is just a good old song, but really it's like you said, it's somebody looking at people that he thought were top of the group in their quote unquote glory days, and how that's not necessarily the case anymore after divorce and all types of stuff. So it's wild to hear this juxtaposition in his songs that I never knew were there. That being said, though, Glory Days is a timeless piece, and rightfully so. It is. It's definitely one of the best compositions on this album.
Yes, and one of the reasons I love 80s pop music so much is because the best of it does have a touch of pathos to it. And the icons that we talk about to this day, there are some dark undercurrents in these really upbeat songs. And you can say it for Bruce, you can say it for Michael, you can say it for Prince, even Madonna. Like, there's a reason they're the ones that have endured because they're deep compositions, even though they're pop songs. So, yeah, Glory Day is a definite winner. And, I did like the video too. It has a bit of a baseball bookend to it in between, the bands. And, it is interesting. Springsteen was big on MTV, even though he wasn't really a video artist. He didn't come up in that, but, hey, MTV needed something while Michael Jackson was in between album cycles. They had to play something. I forgot to mention this earlier. He won the second VMA ever for Best Male Video for I'm on Fire. And I looked at the nominees and I thought, yeah, kind of a weak group, but Michael was in between album cycles. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah. And they had what? They had 3 videos for this album?
4. Born in the USA
4.
had a video as well. And speaking of videos, the most iconic of the videos from this album is, for the next song, Dancing in the Dark, the lead single of the album. Again, another really upbeat song, but this is about self-loathing. And it actually works though. Like, the synths are kind of dark. They give it this undercurrent of it. It's like, actually, the anguish in this song comes all the way across. I definitely heard this song on the radio when I was a kid, and I loved it just because it was a catchy song, but it's a song I've been able to keep going back to because he's singing about real stuff. It's like, yes, I've been there before. This is such a universal song, in my opinion. Just, it kind of leaves me speechless. This is honestly a perfect pop song, in my opinion. I'm not in Springsteen's vocal range at all, but I like doing this song at karaoke. I've done it a few times. This is that song. It's iconic for a reason. And, it was the lead single and Springsteen's biggest ever chart hit. It made it up to number 2. It was first blocked by Duran Duran's The Reflex, which is also a great song. And it would have made it to number 1 if not for the ascendance of a little song called When Doves Cry. This is one of those examples. It's like, yes, obviously this should have been number 1, but the song ahead of it also absolutely deserved to be number 1. This is one of those, it's like, when you see actually what topped the chart ahead of it, it's like, oh, that actually kind of makes sense. Because it's When Doves Cry.
You can't go up against that one, and you're going to lose every time, even though I'm 100% with you. This is that jam. Speechless is definitely a word I would use. There is something inside of this song that is just lightning in a bottle. Whether it is the synths giving that darker undertone that sets this song up to be so accessible, or it just, I really don't know. And I've searched for a week to get these words correct on this, and it really delivers on all levels. I can't help but go to the Tina Turner in my head on this, but that's because this song is so well done. It lends itself to whoever. It's such a great tune, man. I have in my notes guilty pleasure, but only because I feel like people who know me would never have this as a jam for me. I love this song. I always have, and it's definitely one that has become timeless, and rightfully so. It's such a good song.
Yeah, absolutely. And the video is iconic too. It's just a live concert video with Springsteen's admittedly bad dancing, but the camera loves him. He's charismatic doing it. And all these people at this concert. He pulls one young fan out from the audience. It's this lady named Courtney Cox. I wonder if she went on to do anything else. But the world was introduced to her 1984 in this video. Yeah,
It's so wild.
it is wild. That was where it all began. No, that's another reason to be grateful for Dancing in the Dark, actually, in my book. I'm a huge Friends fan, so.
Yeah, it just points for the song. Also, it's so great that I didn't even talk about it being the penultimate track here, but it really paces well and is a neat precursor to what we get going into the final track.
I completely agree with that, though I will say it is definitely not the norm for the lead single to be the penultimate track on an album in any era. They made us wait for this, damn it. I actually would have been kind of pissed if I had bought this album and known I had to wait that long to hear Dancing in the Dark, knowing it was the single and I loved it. Because that would have been if I were a record buyer in 1984, the main reason I would have been picking this album up was for Dancing in the Dark.
Heard that.
That drives me nuts. But it actually is a great segue into the closer, which is my hometown. The most stripped back song on the album by far. Acoustic, but with just a bit of synth to it. This is just one, it just leaves me speechless. What a beautiful song. Hot tea take. I think this song is better than any song on the Nebraska album.
Hot tea take. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like he knew he needed that song here and he did it and knocked it out of the park. I discovered this on the Springsteen Greatest Hits CD, which not many songs on it spoke to me. That's my main basis for me saying I think he's overrated, but I've always really adored this song. And it was the final single, but it was actually a very worthy final single because it's such a beautiful song. And it made it up to number 6, which not undeserved. It may have even deserved to have gone to the top, but like I said, stacked era. Stacked era. Yeah.
Yeah. We've been talking about it not necessarily being a whole cohesive thought as far as the narrative throughout. But I must say, and I pulled back from saying this, talking about I'm on Fire, but this mimics the first half of the album as far as the way it closes out, and it closes out much stronger on a very mellow and somber tone. This is such a beautiful song. I would say that I was a little bit surprised to see it as a single because of the somberness of it, but as I keep listening, there's so much power behind this. I hear your hot tea take on it being better than anything on Nebraska, and it has a Nebraska feel, but I must say I'm glad that it ended out Born in the U.S.A. I think it's a perfect spot for it and a really great closer.
Well, actually, you know what I love about this being the last single? It was released in the winter of 1985. It was the B-side for it was Springsteen's cover of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. That is a perfect wintertime single, in my opinion. Because of the somberness of it, because somberness is real during the winter. And it peaked in the top 10 in January of 86. That's just perfect, in my opinion. So I love how they made this the final single and put it out for the winter. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, I have goosebumps thinking about them being together. That's a 45 to grab.
If I find it,
cool,
that's going to be mine if I find it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I do love that. So there we have it, Born in the U.S.A., one of the biggest albums of the 80s and of all time. I'm so glad that we got to discuss it.
Yeah, man, our first Boss album.
Yep.
Really well done.
Yeah. Well, what's your grade for the album?
Whoa, man. All right. Born in the USA. This one, it's packed. It's packed from front to end with iconic songs. But as far as it being an album, it never really loses any footing. In true E Street Band perseverance, this song is packed with hits, but also just really packed with a lot of great music put together and really, in my opinion, an almost perfect pacing, even though the final track on each side hits a somberness. I think this album is one of the albums we talk about where you can constantly flip. And because of that, I'm going to give it a B plus.
I'm gonna go with a solid B for me. Sequencing, I do wish this album had a bit more of a story to it because this is at its root a singer-songwriter album. I do wish it had more of the concept feeling of a Nebraska, but at the same time, I cannot deny that this album is packed with hits, some of which I like more than others, but the highs are very high and some of my favorite songs, period. So they're the reason that I picked this album to discuss, because there are some of my favorite songs on here. So that's where I am with Born in the USA. What is your favorite song here?
It's tough. It's a tough one, but I'm Dancing in the Dark all the way. That's my jam piece.
It was always going to be Dancing in the Dark for me. It's that song. It just is. There was Glory Days is definitely a close second, though. I'll say that.
Most definitely.
But it's a hit-packed album. It's kind of I wouldn't argue too much if somebody said another track was their favorite. It's like, okay, I can see why it's your favorite, but we had to go with the big hit. It deserved all of its success, and it continues to be successful for good reason. But there we have it, our second album of 1984, and we've got one more to do. Cory, what will that be?
In a month where we're doing 1984, there is no way that we couldn't do the album titled 1984 by one of, whether you like them or not, one of the biggest groups, especially of the era, and that's Van Halen. So we're going to be doing Van Halen's 1984.
I can't wait. So much tea with Van Halen, of course, because talk about a clash of personalities. But yeah, I think it's a great bridge between both Springsteen and Metallica, right in between of what we've done so far. So I am really looking forward to discussing that one. Another 80s classic. But yeah, stay tuned for that and be sure to subscribe where you're listening to us so you can be notified when that episode is out for you to stream and download because we want you to enjoy it. We're really looking forward to talking about Eddie and the boys. And also follow us on social media. The links are in the description. So until next time, try not to jump too high so you can still listen to Turntables and Tea.